There's a version of A Song of Ice and Fire that never actually made it to the page. A version where the greatest hidden threat to the Targaryen legacy wasn't the Blackfyres, it was actually Aerion Brightflame. Now, for those of you who've just watched the show, you will notice that the show sits in the shadow of the Blackfyre Rebellion, and it's referenced a lot, and the Targaryens are recovering from this. But what's interesting is when the first Hedge Knight book was published, there was no mention of Blackfyres at all. And this is surprising because in later lore, the Blackfyre rebellions are central to Targaryen history. They define the political landscape of Westeros for decades. But in the first story, the conflict is small. You've got the Tawny at Ashford Meadow, a hedge knight named Dunk, and a cruel prince called Aerion Targaryen, who's obsessed with fire and dragon imagery. And he doesn't feel like a random villain, he feels significant. He's one of the most disturbing Targaryens we meet. He abuses power casually and brutally. Now, this is where it gets interesting. At the time of the Hedge Knight, Aerion is positioned in a way that suggests future significance. He's the son of Maekar, he has a claim to the throne, and he embodies the worst traits of Targaryen madness. So if you were reading this fresh in 1998, when I read this fresh, I was like, this guy matters a lot. And it gets even more interesting when we find that at the end of the book, Aerion is exiled to Lys and essentially has a cadet branch called the Brightflames. And George has confirmed in an interview that Aerion may have had kids or bastards in the Free Cities. Now, let's jump to A Clash of Kings. Daenerys enters the House of the Undying and sees a series of cryptic visions. One of them stands out, a cloth dragon swaying on poles, cheered by a crowd. Now this is interpreted as young Griff, who we widely recognize as a Blackfyre. But at the time the book was written, the Blackfyres hadn't been fully developed in the lore. So what was George originally hinting at? So some fans believe this false dragon vision, including me, may have initially tied into a different idea, and it was descending from the bright flame, so Aerion. After all, Aerion represents a twisted version of the Targaryen identity. He literally tries to become a dragon, and he embodies the idea of a false dragon. Doesn't that sound familiar? And George has talked a lot about how he writes. He calls himself a gardener, not an architect. He plants the seeds and sees what grows. This means early ideas often evolve or get replaced entirely. So it's very likely that Aerion was originally intended to play a much larger role in the Targaryen legacy. His descendants would have been tied to conflicts in the Winds of Winter, and the false dragon concept existed before it had a name. Then, as the world expanded, George refined that idea, and that's when the Blackfyres came in. Of course, by the time the next Dunk and Egg novella rolls around, the Blackfyres are everywhere. They provide a clean historical explanation for Targaryen civil wars, a believable rival dynasty, and a perfect narrative for imposters and hidden heirs. And it gives us young Griff, the character who may or may not be Aegon Targaryen, but is connected to the Blackfyre lineage in some way. As we know from George's draft chapters of A Feast for Crows, Tyrion overhears High Valyrian being spoke, but he only picks out the words dragon and sword. What else could this refer to other than Blackfyre? So it is likely Aerion Brightflame was part of a larger abandoned plot, and this is shown by his prominence in the early Dunk and Egg novellas, the absence of Blackfyre lore at the time, and his overlap with later ideas like the False Dragon. Thank you for watching, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.